Hello and welcome to WBEZ's event on learning loss amid the pandemic. My name is Kate Grossman and I'm the education editor here at WBEZ, and I'm tonight's moderator. Thank you so much for joining us for this discussion about this really important topic, which is on the minds of so many of us. And that topic, of course, is how are our kids doing academically and what can we do to help them? The goal tonight is to be constructive, to figure out ways to help and support our students and our teachers. And so that's the focus of the discussion, and here's how we're going to run it. The first panel we'll have is where we're going to define the learning loss problem. And when we say learning loss, what we mean is in any given school year, kids are expected to gain a certain amount academically from September to June. And when they don't make those full gains, that's what we consider learning loss. That's what we're going to be talking about. And in the first panel, we're going to hear from a policy expert who's going to bring us up to speed on what research there is about learning loss. And we're also going to hear from a teacher who's lived this, who's been living it for the past year. This teacher, Olga Contreras, who some of you might know, she was the subject of a WBEZ mini documentary by Sarah Karp. So that's our first panel. In our second panel, we're going to talk about, well, what can we do now? And we're going to hear from three educators. We're going to hear from Olga, and we're going to hear from, she's a second grade teacher, and then we'll hear from a middle school teacher, and we'll hear from a high school principal. And then in our third panel, we're going to focus on what lies ahead. Post-pandemic planning is how people are putting it. So in that panel, we're going to hear from two education policy experts who are going to share their thoughts and what people are talking about for how we can help our kids thrive in the future. And throughout the whole evening, we would love to hear from you. So if you have any questions at all for our panelists, please go ahead and put them in the chat. We'll try to answer as many as we can. And we also have some very specific questions for you for each of the sections. So the first one, to get us started, is this. Can you try to share one experience about your child's learning, how it's been affected during the pandemic? So give that some thought and pop your answers into the chat or the comment section as the thoughts come to you. So we're going to move right into the first panel, and we're starting with our first guest, and her name is Miriam Rollin. Miriam runs the National Education Civil Rights Alliance. She has spent decades working in the area of educational justice. She's an expert in this field, and we are really lucky to have her. She's going to help us come up to speed with the research around learning loss and tell us sort of the scope of the problem and who's most affected. So Miriam, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Kate.
Great. So tell us, what do you know about what research there is about instructional loss?
Sure. So the regular testing is generally not happening right now. And in any case, there would be delays in reporting that information. So there's no system-wide information about that. We are seeing snapshots and kind of pieces of the information from various sources. So McKinsey & Company provided some information that talked about estimated learning loss based on what they've seen from one particular type of assessment so far. They're talking about students of color having lost 3 to 5 months of learning in mathematics, and white students perhaps 1 to 3 months. There's other studies like Zern showed participation in online math coursework decreased by 11% this fall, but again, it's a drop of 16% for students of color and lower income students, whereas just 2% for higher income students. And there was another study by NWEA in terms of a study that they, assessment that they have that showed, again, disparate rates of learning loss for lower income kids, for Black and Hispanic kids. And part of the problem is that for those assessments, in many cases, there are many kids that aren't even participating. So this is comparing a regular year, so the prior school year, to this school year, but that's not counting the fact that a lot of kids are not even taking these assessments this year, so not even participating in education programs. So the learning loss actually is going to be far greater, most likely, than what's estimated through these studies.
And what's your sense through this research, and you sort of alluded to this, but which kinds of students are most affected by instructional loss?
Yeah, I mean, in general, it's going to be kids that frankly already were at a disadvantage before COVID hit and now are at a greater disadvantage. In many cases, their parents are working out of the house, so they might not have anyone to help them with their learning if it's remote. In many cases, they and their families have experienced greater trauma because the COVID rates are higher for Black and Hispanic students, for low-income students' families. So COVID has hit harder in those communities, and they're experiencing greater challenges also in those communities for remote learning. In many cases, they don't have the devices they need. In many cases, they don't have broadband they need. So there really is, and then you add to that English language learner students who, sometimes the online program schools are using now aren't in multiple languages, and so they can't participate. And kids with disabilities who in many cases require specialized services that either can't be delivered very easily remotely or aren't being delivered remotely. So really just a number of categories of kids, and increased numbers of homeless kids as a result of homelessness due to the unemployment and pandemic impact in terms of their families. So there's a number of groups of students that, while every student will be affected by COVID, these students are going to be more greatly affected.
So it's obviously a combination of the sort of quality of schooling kids are getting, plus the sort of life situations that kids are dealing with, whether it's, that their parents are out of the house because they're having to work, or they're stressed in the house because mom and dad lost a job, or grandma is sick, or they're living in, a crowded house. All those things contribute. One of the things in the research I read that was really, it's intuitive, but it was striking to me about, particularly for high schoolers, that the peer relationships, the loss of the peer relationships, especially for kids like in ninth grade, is as much of a factor as sort of what they get in the classroom in terms of contributing to learning loss. So all of these together.
Absolutely. And remember that a number of these kids are experiencing traumas that are even greater than whatever they experienced before COVID. And then on top of that, they're not getting the mental health supports that they might have had if schools were open. So counselors or social workers or other mental health and behavioral support. So that aspect, while it's not learning loss specific, will have a big impact on learning loss, and an even bigger impact if it results in kids having behavioral challenges when they go back to school and they end up getting excluded. And so the learning loss is magnified in that situation.
Thank you, Miriam. So we're going to turn now, you sort of given us the macro picture, and now what we really want to hear is the micro picture. So joining me next is WBEZ education reporter Sarah Karp, who spent all fall in a second grade bilingual class here in Chicago in the Little Village neighborhood. This is a second grade class with teacher Olga Contreras, and she went along for the ride as Olga tried to find her way in this really difficult year. Sarah, at the end of all this in December, produced a mini documentary, which if you haven't heard, I really encourage you to make some time to listen to, because it's so instructive for understanding what the pandemic has done to families. And it's also funny and delightful and warm and beautiful and sad and all, like, just every emotion you can possibly imagine. And mostly because this Olga, who you're going to meet in a minute, is just an incredible person. So I'm going to have Sarah, we're going to play a clip from the audio, and Sarah's going to introduce the clip.
Hi, everyone. So in this clip, this is Ms. Contreras talking to the parents of her class after she did an assessment of their students. And what she did in the assessment is she brought each child alone and tested them. And she wasn't required to do this by CPS, but she wanted to do it because she felt like she needed to know where they were so that she could help them move forward. And so this is her talking to the parents after doing that assessment.
The next week, Olga calls a parent meeting. It's about the reading test results. Okay. Bueno, primero que nada, les
Olga
quiero
says
dar
the
las
meeting is
gracias.
going
Es
to be
una
short
junta
but
súper,
important.
súper importante.
She
Ah,
tells
yo
them that the
tengo
17
16
students in her class were very affected by the pandemic. And this is what she wants them to hear. Not one child is where he or she should be in reading.
Cero, cero. Usualmente tengo 8, 10 niños.
In most years, she has 8 or 10 children at or above grade level. This year, she has none.
Esta vez, cero.
But she pivots immediately to how they'll confront this. She'll create small groups where children can get individual attention based on how they learn. She tells the parents it's no one's fault, but she needs their help.
Estoy muy emocionada, padres, porque este es un momento bien histórico para
She
todos.
ends by declaring that she's excited, and this is a historic
Como padres,
moment.
como niños,
Together,
como
they'll beat the
maestras.
pandemic.
Y yo quiero ganarle a la pandemia.
She then asks, do you have any
¿Tienen
questions?
preguntas, comentarios? ¿No?
No one responds. Olga later says she thinks that they didn't have questions because they trust her. She's the teacher. She should know how to fix it.
So Sarah, we're going to bring up Olga.
Yes. Here she comes. Hi.
Hello, everyone.
It's nice to see you. And, you know, that was just one example of how masterfully you work with the parents and the students, but really also the relationship between you and the parents and how close that became. And I think everybody is now wondering, how are the kids doing? So tell us, how are they doing?
They are doing great. We had formed a true community net of support. And we rely on each other, parents, students, and it's just great. We have our routines well established. We have new reading and writing units, science, math. The kids are really excited. My attendance is great. It's excellent. Everybody comes to class every day on time. And that's a good sign for me, just for the kids to be present.
It's a great sign, especially because a lot of times we hear about, you know, lack of attendance or lack of engagement. What do you think? Well, first of all, tell us, have you assessed them again? And where are they now? Are the kids moving? Are they moving forward?
I just finished last week, and I was very thrilled to find the results. 5 out of 17, 5 students out of 17 are exceeding. They are level or above. And I just, you know, I cannot express with words how satisfied I feel about this collective work, because this is not only me, now this is the parents. Now we have a full community working together hand by hand. And also, of course, administration providing all these devices for the students, all the technical support is there. And the other, another 4 students move, and they are very close to that benchmark of being at level. They are very close, five of them. And then four of them are below grade level, but they move like 2 or 3 levels, which is great. And then I have the last 4 who are far below. They moved a level. Nobody stay on the same level, that is great. And everybody has a sense of celebration, and everybody's excited about that growth. I never compare students. They see their own growth. We talk about what is needed to keep moving up. And I just finished Friday, and I'm going to have a meeting with parents. So we're going to celebrate. We're going to celebrate. And I just feel thrilled about the results. And now I have a better idea on how to plan to bring them even to a higher level.
And what do you think? What do you think has been instrumental in bringing them up?
I think there are non-negotiable elements in my teaching that are very important. And the first one is the social emotional classes that we provide time, space, and listening, adults listening to these students who come, and they just want to share how do they feel, what's happening, their fears, their good things. They just want to share. So every day we have that space open. It's for them, maybe student-centered, and it's just about them. We equip them with vocabulary so they understand all these emotions that they are going through, and they listen from each other. And it's just amazing how, I think that's the reason why everybody comes on time. They want to have that time to share their stories, the feeling, the success, whatever it happens. And I even see siblings sitting by them and listening. So just to see those little faces on the side is just great. The other element of my teaching is differentiation. As soon as I saw the results for the beginning of the year, I had to act. I called a couple of colleagues to give support. And I have a teacher assistant who's Ms. Hills, the principal, is always providing that support that I need in order for my students to keep growing. I have a teacher assistant, I have another colleague, I have my resident. So as a team, we were able to divide the students in small groups, and they were provided with the reading levels and everything they need to succeed. From non-readers just having conversational skills to really be focused on comprehension skills. The other element is high rigor goals. My goals are not watered because of the pandemic. They are not watered down because of virtual learning. No, they are high rigor. But what I do, I make a balance by being culturally responsive. So these standards that are high rigor, I intertwine that cultural element. So these lessons are meaningful to them. They have to do with the economics we're going through, with the health, the virus, everything that it's going, it's very meaningful. So my students are able to apply whatever they learn into the real life situations. And the last one is the intertwined sense of belonging. I think that sense of belonging, it's something that being an immigrant families are so in need of that. Like they need that sense of belonging. So all the time the students are participating, they know that this is their space to learn. This is a place where they can explore, be curious, inquire, ask questions, respond questions. And I try to make everything student-centered, academically, socially, and emotionally.
You know, I think we have a time for one more quick question. And one thing I wanted to bring up is, one thing I really noticed is that you don't use a lot of different programs. Like you don't use, there's a whole menu of things that you could use, and you only use a few. And I remember you telling me that was a very conscious choice, that you didn't want to like overwhelm the kids, especially early on, with like all these different tabs and all these different programs. Talk a little bit about why you think that's important, because some people might think like all those programs might be helpful, but I noticed that you try to keep it simple.
Yes, they are helpful for the asynchronous time, which is when they are not with me. But when they are with me, I capitalize on those social interactions that we cannot have in person. So everything is there. I even try to, you saw me reading a book. I avoid using YouTube or any other application. I just want to be there for them. And they also want to be there. They now everybody's turning on their cameras, their mics, they are participating. I think that connection, it's very, very important. That connection of talking and exchanging ideas and opinions right away, like in a regular classroom. And of course, we have the echoing, the noise, and the multiple participation that is kind of annoying, but they are children. And probably I'm the one being bothered by it, but they need that. They need to hear different voices. Sometimes they are talking at the same time, which for me, it's kind of chaotic, but they are children. And there are times that that's allowed, because I want them to feel in this crisis, critical time, a little bit of being normal and just say it.
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Great. Thank you very much. I think we'll move on to the next panel.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Olga, and thank you, Sarah. Olga, we're going to ask you to stick around for the next panel. I'm going to share, we've gotten a couple comments from some of the people in the audience about their experiences with learning during the pandemic. And we have from Bibi, he says, quote, "Learning during this pandemic has made my students more stressed and easily agitated." And then another person, Vivi, says, "CPS doesn't have anything in place to deal with the trauma for our students. Trauma needs to be addressed." I think they all need a few more. We need a few more Olgas out there to help kids deal with the trauma, which we know is very real. So we are going to move on to hear from some more educators who can share some of their strategies, as Olga did, about helping students get the most out of their education now, whatever the limitations are that they're facing. And as we head into this section, I have another question for the audience, which I'd love for you to put your answers into the chat or the comment section. So for parents and educators, what strategies are your schools using now that are helping students grow academically? And what strategies are schools using that are not working, i.e. like what should they do differently? And if you have any specific questions for our panelists, you should put those in as well. So up next for our second panel, we have Claire Bansberg. Claire is a 7th grade language arts teacher in suburban Glenview. She's been teaching in a hybrid model all year, most of the year. That's 2 days a week in the classroom and the rest of the days at home, teaching out of her house. And most of her kids are in person or using the hybrid model. And also joining us is, to round out, we have elementary school with Olga, Claire's middle school, and we have Karen Calloway, who is the principal at Kenwood Academy High School. That's a Chicago public school on the South Side. So thanks, Claire and Karen, for joining us. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us as well.
Great. So we're all well aware of the limits of remote learning and of hybrid, for that matter, as Claire can attest. But we know that some of what's happening in classrooms is better than what's happening in some other classrooms. And we know from some of the research out there, and we know intuitively, that there has been learning loss, but it can be mitigated by good practice in the moment, whether it's hybrid or whether it's remote learning, or even if it's full in person, although nobody's talking about that, but we could do better without a doubt. And so I wanted to talk to you three about what's working and what more can we do. So let's start with Karen. I wanted to ask you about how your teachers have adjusted to help students catch up and grow despite the inherent limitations of the remote learning that they're doing during the pandemic.
Well, I think what our teachers did early on, once we realized that this was going to be our new reality, over the summer, they did a lot of planning and really looked at the curriculum and identified the skills that were non-negotiables. Like, these are skills that students must have. And so they were able to take a look at that and readjust their curriculum and provide that throughout the course of the remote learning experience that students are having. So I think a lot of it is really, there are some skills that we realized that we're going to have to come back to, but we wanted to really look and see what are the pieces that really are going to support students in critical thinking. We know in high school, we want to build critical thinkers. We want them to be able to sustain a curriculum that's going to allow them to be successful and competitive once they graduate from high school. So I think the biggest piece in the beginning early on was aligning and adjusting the curriculum.
Do you think one of the, Robin Staines, who's going to come on later from Advance Illinois, they did a bunch of focus groups with people around the state, students and parents and caregivers talking about remote learning. And one of the things that was sort of universally said was that people felt that the rigor was diluted in remote learning, that it was sort of more about rote learning and less about skill building and less about critical thinking and big ideas and and sort of the skills that you really want kids that sort of help build their minds. The report said that they often saw that in the AP and honors classes, but not as much in the sort of the college prep level classes. What do you know how you're, and I know, I have 2 high schoolers myself. I know it's really hard. The cameras are off. It's hard to have classroom discussions. Like, how do you move beyond the limitations of the screen to get kind of meaningful discussion with kids to work on those higher order skills?
Well, I think first of all, what some of our teachers have found to be really successful is really polling students, like figuring out what it is that they want to learn, giving them an opportunity to have student choice and agency around their own learning. They get to buy-in from students when you're able to do that. And I think that has been really a plus. As I've met and spoken with many of our teachers, they have said that this is something that students really get excited about. And I think, I wouldn't say that I think that the curriculum has been watered down. I think that it's still as rigorous. However, what they did was they really looked at the quantity of it versus the quality. So, I mean, the quality versus the quantity. So versus, having this long unit, maybe they reduced the length of the unit, but they made sure to sustain the quantity of the unit. Not quantity, quality of the
quality,
unit.
right.
Sure that the coursework and the skills that are covered are as rigorous as they would have been as in person. So I think, one, getting students to really engage and buy into their own learning by polling and asking questions about what they want to learn. I think that was one way that we were able to keep it as close as we could to what they're getting in the classroom.
And Claire, can you talk a little bit on the same topic about how you've managed in your English language arts to get students engaged despite the limitations that you face?
Absolutely. Yeah. To echo Karen, I think really this year has been all about quality over quantity. And so much of what we've learned in this time are best practices that I hope will carry over to our typical school years in the future. But, prioritizing depth of learning over surface level coverage, looking at our content area standards and curriculum maps and saying, what do I absolutely want my students to get out of this school year? I think, our first instinct is this panicked kind of make up for lost time approach that educators might feel pressured to take. But really it's self-defeating, because you're ultimately going to lose the students if you're kind of working at that surface level to cover more content. And I think what's often lost in that pressure cooker is those kind of community building and relationship building activities or practices, the soft starts, the movement breaks, the discussion pauses, and that's what matters most right now. You think about the term learning loss, and as Olga said, like what they've learned is that sense of what they've lost this year is like that sense of belonging, that sense of community. So, bringing back that joy in the classroom and prioritizing that social emotional time, while it feels like time that we're taking away from, our content area skills or standards, it's what they need to feel connected to the learning that they're doing.
On that, we have a question from someone, Margaret on Facebook, who asks Olga, related to that, or sorry, it's Catherine on YouTube. She says, would you elaborate on how you create a student-centered classroom remotely? Could you give some examples, Olga, about how you do that?
Sure. For example, for my unit science, the kids had to learn the interdependence between animals and plants. And they had to study the way plants grow and seeds and all these factors about interdependence. So in the classroom, I have all these materials with seeds, and we do all these investigations. And the first thing that came to my mind, that I was really into panic, I was really scared, but then I thought about having the parents involved and do home projects. So the kids started talking about, I explained the parents how I was going to kind of switch gears, and we decided to talk about gardening. And to my surprise, many of my parents love gardening. So I was blown away by all the feedback that I had and all what the kids brought to the classroom and how they were seeing different trees outside on the street. They started collecting seeds, leaves. It was just like a domino effect just by inviting the parents to plant a seed. And then they were talking about gardens and they were sending pictures on the phone. I also have different modalities, like they can send me a picture via Remind or just place it on Google Classroom. They send me also audios to explain how many plants they had in the gardens. So parents, the parents who are staying at home, they are really trying to invest now that they have the time and to connect with students. And that's when I saw that the kids came up with more questions about interdependence between plants and animals. So when they took the assessment at the end of the unit, which is a critical thinking question, they have to answer and explain. I was blown away by their well-constructed claims and their well-constructed explanations. I mean, I was like, I wasn't even thinking that I was going to have to go halfway, but the kids were reading, they were writing, and I provided these books virtually, but all the investigations were done at home with the parent support. So it has been amazing. Now I start a new unit on glue. Again, I have all the materials in my classroom. Well, guess what? We're gonna do glue to make piñatas, and I know parents know how to make piñatas. So I'm finding ways where parents are part of it. And when the students see that, there is dialogue, there is meaningfulness to this. And then that's what the kids say, how do I spell this word? How do I do this? So at the end, I'm making sure that the students take the school into their homes and investigate with their parents. I even have videos done by the kids on their own. It's just amazing when I question, when the questions are student-centered and they have to investigate and I don't give any answers, they just go above and beyond.
Karen, when we spoke before the event, you mentioned that students had come to you asking for more social emotional supports. I wondered what is your sense about what students, obviously it's related to what Olga's saying, it's this connection and wanting to feel more connected to school and what else, what are students, do you think, yearning for? What do they need?
Well, high school students are ready for engagement. They want to be with each other. This is, high school is really just a really big social place for students. And I think that they're really missing that. So teachers are really trying to come up with different ways to make sure the students are engaged and making sure that activities and events are still happening as they would if they had been in person, but trying to do it virtually. So it's challenging, and for some students it helps, but we're still missing that engagement piece that high school students really thrive on. So we've like, this month is Black History Month, and we've come up with all kind of events for students to participate in virtually. We have a series here called the Ken Talk series, which is similar to the TED Talk, but we take the TED off and put a Ken in front of it for Kenwood, and students will have an opportunity to meet all different types of individuals in different careers from different colleges. We had an alum out last week who is a producer for Grey's Anatomy. And so we just really try to come up with really creative ways to keep them engaged, to get them excited about school and to stay invested in the entire process.
And let me ask, this is up for anyone who feels equipped to answer it. There's a question from Margaret on Facebook, and she asks, what are your thoughts on students repeating grades to make up for the learning loss endured over the past year? And I want to take a step.
I don't know that I would necessarily do that. I know this summer, and I know we haven't gotten to this, but I know in the summer we're doing what we're calling the Bronco Boost. And so we're going to offer classes, which are like enrichment courses that will cover some of the skills or the standards that might have been missed, or that teachers might not have had an opportunity to spend as much time on. We're going to offer that as an enrichment opportunity before students move on to the next level. So I think there are ways to capture some of the learning that parents and teachers may have felt that a student might have missed through additional Saturday learning experiences, through tutorial sessions. There are many ways to capture it versus having a student to repeat the grade. I personally don't think that would be necessary. And I think that working with your school principal and your school, your teachers to figure out what exactly students need to cover, and trying to make sure as a parent that is being covered. You have a lot of online options like Khan Academy, the IXL math format, the No Red Ink is another one. That's an online platform that teachers are using that parents can tune into to see where their students are and where they should be. Are they at benchmark? How far below benchmark are they? So these are platforms that teachers, parents, and students can use to help, really sustain the learning.
And let me ask, in Chicago here, there's obviously been lots of talk recently about the return to in-person learning. There's no plan yet for high schools, but, Olga students are going to be coming back in March and the preschoolers are back. Claire has been in person, hybrid most of the year. We had a conversation before this event where, it's been hard. It sounds like it's got some real limitations. I wonder Claire, if you could talk about who, if you had to sort of prioritize who would be who would benefit the most from coming back in person.
Yeah, and this was kind of discussed at the start of the program with your conversation with Miriam, but certainly our most at-risk learners, our SPED students, our ELL and bilingual learners have greatly benefited from the in-person experience. And my ideal hybrid scenario is one in which those students are prioritized in both the amount of time that they're given in the physical classroom and the amount of one-on-one support that they're receiving. Certainly we have the pressure of the community that every parent wants that in-person experience for their student, understandably so, but those are the students who are immensely benefiting from that in-person experience. And it's felt risky, and we're taking safety risks to be together this year. So those risks are worth it for me when we're meeting the needs of those students who need our in-person support the most.
Yeah. And what, from your experience so far in hybrid, can you point to a couple things that have made it more successful? What has helped make it work in ways where it works?
Yeah, I have the benefit of a co-teacher in my classroom, as Olga was mentioning. That makes a world of difference. We're in a simultaneous model where half of our students are on Zoom, whilst the other half is in person in front of us. So for us to be able to kind of divide and conquer and manage both of those classroom spaces has made a world of difference. There has been real beauty in the small engagements that we've had in the classroom. There will sometimes only be 4 or 5 students in attendance, and it's 4 or 5 students who might never have connected with each other prior to this time. So really just capitalizing on those experiences, and as students are craving those connections and that sense of belonging, we're finding it in unlikely places with those combinations of students who are in person at the same time. And I think that's been kind of a silver lining in this time.
Okay. We just have 1 minute left. Is there anything I didn't ask you all that you wanted to add about what strategies are most effective? I want to make sure I cover what's been on your mind.
I can start. For me, just to have my lessons culturally responsive and have elements of what's happening in my students' home, interests, what are they curious about? And that really brings my instruction to a higher level.
Yeah.
I think that for us, what's been most helpful is being really creative around supporting students' social emotional learning and growth, making sure that that's incorporated in the day-to-day activities with students, and also providing a lot of supports outside the classroom or outside the virtual classroom, strategies like virtual homework boot camps, offering multiple tutorial opportunities virtually. And then also at Kenwood, we have learning hubs where some students or some parents are able to bring their students in to get support here on campus. Obviously, it's not teachers in place, but we do have support staff that are really willing to help students who are really academically struggling. So these are just some strategies that we've tried to employ to help our students during this process.
Yeah, I would just briefly second that. We have implemented weekly one-on-one check-ins with our students where we survey them on their social emotional well-being and follow up with them accordingly, either with individual teacher check-ins or bringing in social workers and psychologists when need be. And you know, I read a great op-ed in Ed Week this week that said if our students are in trauma or really struggling socially, emotionally, we sound like the Charlie Brown teacher. So I think we just need to be prioritizing their social emotional well-being, and I would hope that those check-ins and those strategies carry on post-pandemic.
Great, thank you so much. So, Olga and Claire, we're gonna let you go, but we're so grateful to have your insights. This has been terrific. And Karen, we're gonna ask you to stick around.
Okay.
Thank you. So moving on, we're gonna talk about what comes next. Imagine the day when we might be back to something close to normal. And we're thinking of post-pandemic planning. So the audience question for this last panel is, what can schools do to help students accelerate learning when students can finally return full-time? So for this last panel, we want to welcome back Miriam Rollin. She's, as I mentioned before, she directs the National Education Civil Rights Alliance. And our last panelist is Robin Staines. She's the president of Advance Illinois. It's an education advocacy group, and they released a report on this very topic about learning in the pandemic in December. Hello, Robin. Thanks for joining us. So I've been doing a lot of reading on this topic about what do we do when the world turns right side up again. And the general consensus seems to be that we really need to start post-pandemic planning now, like yesterday. And it can't just be tinkering. It needs to be sort of a sweeping multi-year thinking plan about what are we gonna do. I'll just read a summary line, a couple sentences from the report that Advance Illinois put out. It says, quote, "We know simply returning to in-person schooling is not enough. Absent dramatic, sustained, and intentional interventions, we run the risk of losing a generation of students." Pretty sobering. So Robin, I want to start with you and ask what do you think and your organization thinks needs to be done, and can Illinois pull that off?
So I think it's a daunting task, and I'm sure that I'm not the only one who wakes up on many mornings wondering, this is a once in a century situation we find ourselves in. Yep. And are we going to be able to rise to that? And this is Illinois, where we sometimes don't even do the easy things as well as we should. It is going to take a multi-year thinking, and it is going to take. We've got 852 districts that have 852 levels of funding going into this, 852 different levels of staffing capacity to meet student needs coming into this. So one of the things that we're going to have to do that is not typical for us is we're going to need a statewide strategy. And we're going to need it for a couple of reasons. One, you don't want 852 different solutions, some of which will reflect the level of support and funding that exists. So disparities will just widen. Two, it requires, you have to look beyond just K-12. I mean, I'm with Karen. I don't think that holding students back, the research doesn't suggest that's ultimately going to be good for kids. But we're going to have kids over the next few years who are going to be graduating and hopefully going on to post-secondary, who are both going to feel unprepared and may in fact be less well prepared. And so we need a strategy, and K-12 systems are going to have to talk to their post-secondary colleagues and partners so that we can support kids to make that transition successfully. And the same thing's true from middle school to high school. So the good news is that the state has what's called a P20 council, P for pre-kindergarten, 20 for grade 20. And that P20 council has actually come together starting last fall and is doing state level coordinated planning across early childhood, K-12 and higher ed, and working with experts across the state and the country to develop both guidance for districts and community colleges and universities on strategies they might consider. And then the state is looking at how it can support that, how it can use its federal and state funding and strategic planning to support those efforts to take some of the burden off of the state's backs and to make sure that there is an equitable array of what's available.
So let's talk, Miriam, let me pull you in here. You know, there's lots of talk about more time in school for kids, whether that's after school or summer school or before school or extended day or year. But as we all know, not all remedies are equal, right? So we could end up wasting a lot of time and money, for that matter, on things that don't work very well. I wonder, what's your thinking about what the research tells us and what you've heard and read about that might be effective strategies for helping kids catch up and really thrive?
I think, I don't think there's one silver bullet that's going to do it. I think it's a multitude of strategies. And, you know, I think you just heard about, you know, kind of a state planning process that can help get to those multiple strategies. But, you know, it certainly can include extended day and year and summer learning. It can certainly include intensive tutoring for children that need that. It can certainly include additional supports. You know, I was interested in listening to the other panelists in the earlier part of the program talk about many things that a lot of folks wouldn't connect to learning loss, but they are so integral. So things like social emotional skills and services and supports, we need that too. And that relates to learning loss, because if, you know, if kids are not able to focus and able to address learning at all because of what's going on in terms of trauma, that's going to make it difficult. So we need to have those social emotional supports. And I think that's different. Like we need a lot more than schools have ever provided in that area. And again, this is a once in a century pandemic event. We need a once in a century level of commitment to providing that. We also heard about parents and from Olga, the importance of parents. And again, that's something that really hasn't necessarily been top of mind in terms of addressing learning in schools, but I think that's a critical part of this as well. You know, we also heard about culturally responsive learning and relevant learning, making it relevant to engage students. You know, a lot of the rote, you know, teach to the test, you know, kind of systems that have been promulgated have not done really well in terms of engaging students generally, and certainly have not done very well in terms of engaging our most at-risk, vulnerable, marginalized students. And so that's an important part of it is, you know, having things relevant and student-led. I loved what, Karen, what you were talking about in terms of critical thinking and having student choice and power over what they're learning. You know, I think a lot of these student engagement strategies have not been top of mind necessarily for some educators. I won't say all educators, but I think they are now. They've had to be. So in some ways, maybe the pandemic is teaching us some things that we can do once kids return to school that will actually not just be getting back to normal, but actually will be better than what was there before.
And what we talked about before, and I've done quite a lot of reading, there's a lot of talk of sort of starting a national tutoring corps, and not just sort of a weekly tutoring session with volunteers, but sort of daily intensive tutoring, particularly in math, maybe in the lower grades, to help students. You know, math is sequential, and if you miss the beginning, you know, it obviously just builds on it. Can you talk a little bit about what you know about a movement to try to do national or really dramatically expand tutoring?
Yeah, I mean, there have been some reports that have come out just within the last few months about a national tutoring corps, paid, not volunteer, and with a evidence-based curricula and approach, and that's of sufficient dosage that will actually make a difference. It can't just be a one-shot deal. It can't even be a 2 or 3-shot deal. It's got to be a sustained relationship. But there is evidence that an approach, if done well, for a national tutoring corps can actually be pretty powerful. That Britain's trying it right now. That actually hasn't yet been kind of taking hold in the US, but I'm hopeful that, again, you know, this is an unprecedented size challenge. We need to have some unprecedented size answers to the challenge. And I think, you know, the kind of let 1,000 flowers bloom isn't necessarily going to get us to where our kids need to be. And so a national tutoring corps, I think, is a very helpful idea, and the research shows it could really make a difference.
Karen, you know, you live in the world of how do I get it done? You know, when we talked about some of these things, you talked about, you know, the limitations of tutoring could be, you know, CPS has a pretty onerous process for fingerprinting and background checks for anyone who wants to volunteer or work in CPS, and that could make it hard for people to, you know, to work as tutors, or, you know, if you do the summer program, like, will students actually be able to recover credit? I mean, there's all these sort of, I mean,
Right.
for good reason, but bureaucratic hurdles to get over to implement some of these things. What do you think would be most useful for kids looking ahead if you want to try to help build kids up starting this summer and beyond?
I think 2 things. One, you know, really getting teachers on board, which teachers here have been really on board with trying to figure out ways to support student learning moving forward, right? So we want to create like these core, for the core courses, math, science, English, and social studies. We want to create these booster classes over the summer. Teachers got really excited. As a matter of fact, the teachers are the ones who brought it up. It really wasn't me. We were in a department chair meeting. We talked about doing some summer learning enrichment, and possibly, you know, really trying to get as many students involved in it so that when they move to the next level, they have a even larger foundation as they prepare to move ahead. Also, getting parents trained on some of the online platforms like Khan Academy, or like I said, mentioned earlier, the IXL format or No Red Ink. These are online platforms that will support student learning that they can do on their own. It's kind of like a personalized learning, and parents can support that with them. It really kind of explains what it is that they need to do, where the error or the mistake was, where they are. So the person who asked a question about holding the student back a year, this would help identify what gaps students may have. And it's something that they can do independent of the school. So I think training parents on how to do that is another way that we could support some of this. And then the tutorial piece is huge, you know, just really building a tutorial pod of tutors at each school that will work with students throughout the summer or even after school next year. I think that really would be instrumental. We've been very fortunate to have the University of Chicago in our backyard. So we have quite a few tutors from there who currently are working with our students. And I think that has been really helpful. Also, we hired a private tutorial company here at Kenwood to work with some of our students. Because typically teachers would do it, but I think teachers are just kind of exhausted right now. So to ask them to teach all day virtually and then can you give me 2 more hours? Just give me 2 more hours and teach is really a lot to ask. So we've outsourced some of the tutorial work. I have a chemistry major who is a graduate of Northwestern, and she's really been excited to work with the students. It's really been helpful. So you just really, as an educator, have to be super creative, and each day is different, and just figure out, what we can do to get where we're trying to get to.
Right. Well, I just have one last question before we wrap, and that's, if we as a country, really do try to go big and have a national tutoring corps, or, want to extend the school year or the school day, that obviously costs. So where's the money going to come from? Robin, do you have, where are we?
Yeah,
gonna-
look, I think that with the CARES Act 2 funding, both CARES Act 1 and CARES Act 2, those are significant amounts of dollars. I think the CPS share of CARES Act 2 is roughly $800 million, which they can obligate and spend over 3 years. I appreciate the fact that, there are new dollars that are several multiples of what came in CARES Act 2 that are going to be up for vote next week and on top of that, FEMA is allowing a number of health and safety expenses, pretty significant things that schools need to do. You've been hearing about some of the measures, allowing them to get that reimbursed through FEMA. If you add all that up and you ignore, and because it allows you to do this over multiple years, it allows us to dream bigger than we usually do for some of these recovery specific. If you want to do significant summer school tutoring work, there's got to be more training. The social and emotional support, really, you're hearing that come through over and over again. If we want to extend counseling throughout the school year, not just a 9-month schedule, but having counselors and social workers available year round, allowing universities to drop down and actually start to meet their incoming freshmen as they're graduating, for example, things like that. Those are things that for the next few years, there's enough federal funding that we should be thinking big. We ought to be able to pull that off. I think some of that, Miriam mentioned that, I heard it implicit in Karen's comments, it should be here to stay. Some of these ideas are ones that we should then work hard to pick up, which is why the governor's budget address, which he's giving tomorrow, it still matters that we get the state funds, that we can do some things in the short term, but there are things we're going to need to do even after that 2-3 years. And for that, we're going to have state dollars. We're going to have to know they're coming, or schools won't be able to make the longer term plans they need. But I am cautiously optimistic that with the federal funding we've already got and what's up for discussion, we ought to be in a position to make some big bets at the level that our kids really need.
Great. Well, that is a good optimistic note to end on. So Karen, Robin, and Miriam, thank you so much. This has been a terrific conversation. I hope you've enjoyed it. I know I have, and I hope our audience has. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Kate.
Good night.
So thanks to all of our guests for being with us tonight and sharing their expertise and their insights, especially Olga and the families in our class for letting us into their lives and into your remote classroom. And thanks to you, our audience, for tuning in for this conversation. I really hope you've gotten something out of it. We've put a link to a survey in the comments section. So please let us know what you thought of the program and what you'd like to see in the future. For the latest education news, visit our education page on our website at wbez.org. There's a link for that also in the chat. This event will live on our Facebook page and YouTube if you want to share it with others, and we please circulate it. Behind the scenes, a thank you to Marquita Wiggins and Sarah Balama for excellent directing and producing. Could not do it without them. So again, thanks to all of you for joining us. Have a good night and happy learning. Thanks again.